Okay, NFL Week in Review, Week 7 edition. I'm a little late with this, but that's all right. Better late than never, and I'm here now, so let's do it. Let's get into it. Let's talk about the action that happened this week and how I felt about it, and just everything in between. Let's go. Ravens versus Browns. This was a game that was played on the ground for a majority of the contest. Nick Chubb has arguably been the best running back in the league this season, and as such, the Browns rode him in this battle. While on the other side, the Ravens' run game was well conducted, thanks to Lamar's ability to move on his feet, and even more so thanks to Gus Edwards, who put 2 touchdowns on the board. In the end, though, similar to last week against the Chargers, the Browns ran a poor drive late in the game, which led to a long field goal attempt that went way left and short, leading to the loss for Cleveland. Overall, a rough showing for the Browns, and for Baltimore, this game was a slight improvement for them, though they still have a long way to go as the season develops. Panthers versus Buccaneers. Wow, man, Tom Brady is having a really rough go of it recently. The Panthers are a bad football team, and yet they made the books look so much worse in this contest. Credit to PJ Walker for stepping into the QB1 role and making an impact as he looked great, and also credit to both Panthers running backs as both of them looked very good amidst the CMC trade. For the Bucks, this was a really crappy performance, and this team has not looked anywhere near as good as most thought they would. Bengals versus Falcons. The Bengals look phenomenal once again this week, as they seem to be riding the ship after a rough start. Joe Burrow is back to his last season form, and his tandem with Jamar Chase is once again looking great. For the Falcons, they came back down to earth this week after their impressive performance against Tampa last week. They put up a fight, but were ultimately outgunned, outmatched, and outperformed, en route to a loss that puts them back under 500. The biggest takeaway from this game as a whole is that Jamar Chase left it with an injury, which will certainly affect Cincinnati for the foreseeable future, and it will be interesting to see just how much his absence will affect the next stretch of their season. Lions versus Cowboys. Yeah, so Detroit is back to being Detroit. Last week against the Patriots was a taste of that, but this week was definitely a confirmation, as they were abysmal at every level and were thoroughly outclassed by Dallas. For Dallas, this was a solid performance by them. They have their QB1 back, and even though Dak didn't light up the box score, he still ran the offense well, as the team put up a respectable 21 points, thanks in big part to a solid run game and contributions from their two backs Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard. Overall, the Cowboys are still looking solid this year, while the Lions are definitely not. Giants versus Jaguars. I've said this every week, but I'm a huge fan of what Brian Daboll is doing this season. If the season ended right now, he would be my coach of the year, no question. This game is another example, as he has this team, which on paper is less than stacked, performing really well and getting the job done by any means necessary. I also want to give credit to Daniel Jones, who had one of his best games of the season, and also credit to Saquon, who has continued his campaign as a top 5 back in the league this year. For the Jags, this wasn't the worst performance I could have had, but they made some unforced errors and came up short, especially in the fourth quarter where they were outscored 10 points to 0 and got stopped on 2 red zone drives, which could have drastically changed the outcome of the game. Overall, the Giants have been a fun team, and if they keep it up, they can do a lot this year. Packers versus Commanders. The Packers have had a rough start to the season, and this game was a good display of that. Their offense was effective enough to score 2 touchdowns, but was ultimately inefficient, being unable to convert on third or fourth down at any point in the contest. And their defense was torched a couple times throughout and suffered a healthy dose of ground game from the Commanders' offense. For Washington, they played really well in this game. Tyler Haneke stepped up in Wentz's absence and put in a really solid shift, and was helped by the aforementioned run game of Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson, as well as his number one target, Terry McLaurin, who put up 70 yards and a touchdown. Overall, the Commanders look like the better team here, and the Packers need to figure out a lot if they want to come close to competing this season. Colts versus Titans. This was a matchup between divisional rivals and was a very ugly game. The Colts especially were an absolute mess, which is unfortunate given that it seemed like they were getting things back on track against Jacksonville last week. But this game killed that possibility as they came to Tennessee where they turned the ball over 3 times and were shut down at basically every turn. For Tennessee, Derrick Henry put up a lot of yards, which helped them a lot in this game, but it was ultimately their kicker Reggie Bullock who knocked through 4 field goals, and their defense, which not only bottled up the Colts, but forced a pick six to score Tennessee's only touchdown in the game that gave them the edge. Overall, neither of these teams are real contenders in the AFC, but because their division is so bad, one of them will make the playoffs. And if I had to pick, that team will be Tennessee. Texans versus Raiders. This was a really good performance for the Raiders. The key strength in this game was the work they did on the ground, as Josh Jacobs put up an amazing performance with over 130 yards and 3 touchdowns. They were also solidly efficient through the air, as Derek Carr threw for 1 touchdown and kept a solid 77% completion percentage. For the Texans, they really didn't do anything massively wrong on offense, aside from 1 interception, but their defense really failed them in this game, which is obvious by just looking at the 38 points they gave up. Overall, neither of these teams are vying for Super Bowl contention or anything, but the Raiders are clearly the better team and have slightly more hope for the season than Houston. Jets versus Broncos. The Jets continue to be surprisingly good, and the Broncos continue to struggle. For the Jets, they were the beneficiary of a strong performance by Brees Hall, who was great, but unfortunately sustained a season-ending injury in this game, which will no doubt hurt the Jets going forward. Outside of that, their defense was also very solid, getting 1 interception and holding Denver to 9 points. For Denver, backup quarterback Brett Rypien led the team in this game and was thoroughly nullified by the Jets as the Broncos' offense continued to struggle. Their defense was alright in this game, but it wasn't enough, and the Broncos again fell short, which has been a trend this season and will likely continue. Chiefs versus 49ers. The Chiefs were incredibly good in this game, especially in the second half, where they outscored the Niners 30-10, which is what pushed this game to blowout territory by the final horn. The offense was of course phenomenal, but the defense also looked quite good in this game, forcing 2 interceptions and recording 5 sacks for an all-in-all really solid showing. For the Niners, the second half they had was really poor and proved that despite the CMC trade, this team still has a lot of room to improve. Overall, the Chiefs are a top 2 team in the AFC, and the Niners are still inconsistent. Seahawks versus Chargers. The Seahawks looked really good in this game, and their win here pushed them into first place in the NFC West. Now, whether that spot lasts long for them or not, I give them enormous credit for how they played this year, especially Geno Smith, who has probably been a top 10 quarterback and got the better of Justin Herbert in this matchup. For the Chargers, they were really inefficient in this game on offense, and their defense got torched, both in the pass game, but especially on the ground, as KW3 put in an amazing performance, making the Bolts look silly. Overall, these teams have the same record, but while one feels like a hopeful surprise, the other feels like a disappointment, and ultimately, I think both teams have a ceiling for how far they can go this season. Steelers versus Dolphins. This was another ugly game and one where the Steelers shot themselves in the foot a lot. I like Kenny Pickett, but he's having a terrible start to his NFL career. This game didn't help that, as he threw 3 interceptions and his offense only mustered 10 points. The Dolphins, for their part, weren't much better on offense in terms of volume, but were much more efficient, and ultimately the decider was their dominance by their defense, which is what gave them the 6-point win. Overall, the Steelers still have a lot to figure out, and the Dolphins need to decide whether they want to be good. Bears versus Patriots. This game was a surprise. The Patriots were hot off of 2 really dominant performances in back-to-back weeks, and I expected the same out of them in this one, but it turned into the opposite. They lost by almost 20 points, and their offense couldn't get going regardless of who was at the helm. Credit to Chicago, who put in a frankly rare good performance and looked like a solid team thanks to good showings from Justin Fields and David Montgomery, as well as the defense who forced 3 turnovers. Overall, both these teams are under 500, and both are sort of inconsistent, which will hurt them as the season goes on.